Chapter 1. Hunger on Main Street. The town of Dry Creek simmered under the late afternoon sun, heat rising in waves off the dusty street. Wagon wheels creaked, horses stamped their hooves, and from the open doors of the saloon came a muddled mix of laughter, piano notes, and the clink of glasses. Clara stood at the edge of the boardwalk, her boots scuffed near the holes, her dress dulled by dust from 100 miles of hard trail. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, sharpened the eyes of the men lounging outside, watching her with that brand of curiosity reserved for strangers, and especially for women alone. She pushed open the saloon doors, the hinges whining in protest. A hush fell for half a breath, as it always did when a new face crossed the threshold, before the chatter picked back up. The smell of whiskey, cigar smoke, and fried pork hit her so hard she nearly staggered. She kept her chin high, though her knees wobbled. Inside, cowboys leaned over card tables, miners shouted at dice, and painted girls laughed too loudly from upstairs balconies. Clara made her way to the bar, her hand rising to the small silver locket at her throat, the last thing she owned. She laid it on the counter, her fingers trembling. "Food," she said, her voice low, dry as prairie dust. "This'll cover it." The barkeep, a round man with a greasy apron, raised a brow. "Ain't a pawn shop, missy. That trinket might buy you half a drink, if you're lucky." A ripple of laughter came from a nearby table, the sound like spurs dragging across stone. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't take the locket back. Pride had been stripped from her long before she stumbled into Dry Creek. The barkeep shrugged, about to wave her off, when a voice came from the far corner, steady, quiet, carrying more weight than a shout. "Give her a plate." The saloon stilled again. Heads turned. In the shadowed corner sat a cowboy alone, broad-shouldered, his hat tipped low. Dust clung to his boots. His spurs caught the lantern light, and his eyes, when he lifted them, were the kind that had seen too many miles of sorrow. Clara froze, caught between shame and relief. The barkeep grumbled, but he slid a steaming plate of beans and cornbread across the bar. Clara's hand shook as she carried it to a table, sitting down before her legs gave out. She shoveled the food in as though afraid it might vanish. When at last she dared look up, the cowboy was still watching her. He tipped his hat. "Eat first," he said softly, his voice deep and sure. "We'll talk after." The piano resumed, dice rattled, and voices rose again. But for Clara, the world had narrowed to a plate of beans, a silver locket, and the stranger who had just changed everything. Chapter 2. Shadows Behind the Smile. The saloon grew louder as evening settled over Dry Creek. Lanterns hissed alife, throwing golden light across whiskey bottles and smoke-thick air. Clara sat with her empty plate, her locket still lying on the counter where she'd left it, as if her whole life had been reduced to that single trinket. Her belly was full for the first time in days, but the tightness in her chest remained. The cowboy from the corner rose at last. His spurs chimed softly against the creaking floorboards as he crossed the room. A few men watched him, but no one dared speak. He carried himself with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who had no need to prove anything. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, like a river that moved steady but strong. Clara hesitated, fingers tightening on the rim of her plate. "I don't know that you'd want to." He gave the ghost of a smile and settled across from her anyway. He pulled off his hat, setting it down carefully, and his eyes, clear, steady, met hers. "Name's Ethan. You look like you could use more than supper." The words nearly undid her. She forced herself to lift her chin. "Clara, and I'll pay you back. The food, somehow. You already tried." His gaze flicked toward the locket on the bar. "Keep it. A woman shouldn't have to trade her last piece of herself for beans." Her breath caught. She wanted to thank him, but the words fell like stones in her throat. Instead, She glanced toward the saloon doors, her heart thudding. She'd felt eyes on her since the moment she stepped into town. Ethan followed her glance. His brow furrowed. "Someone after you?" Clara's spoon slipped, clattering against the empty plate. She forced a laugh, but it was too thin, too sharp. "I've just had bad luck. That's all." But her hands betrayed her. They trembled where she tried to fold them in her lap. Ethan noticed. He didn't press, only leaned back, as though giving her space while still keeping watch. From the doorway came the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate. Clara stiffened, her face draining of color. Two men lingered just outside in the growing dusk, shadows long across the boards. One struck a match and lit a cigar, eyes flicking toward the saloon as though they were waiting. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't look at her when he spoke, but his tone carried a promise. "Whoever they are, you're not facing them alone." Clara lowered her gaze to the scarred table, biting her lip until it hurt. For the first time in months, a flicker of safety stirred in her chest, though she knew the storm was far from over. Chapter 3. The Ride Out of Town. By the time dawn broke, Dry Creek was already stirring. Wagons creaked down the street. Shopkeepers opened shutters, and a thin veil of dust rolled in from Prairie. Clara lingered near the edge of town, clutching her locket in one hand, as if it might anchor her. She hadn't slept much. Every groan of the saloon floorboards, every creak of shutter had sounded like pursuit. Ethan appeared on horseback, leading a second animal by the reins. His wide brim had shadowed his face, but his eyes found hers with calm certainty that steadied her frayed nerves. "You plan to keep running?" he asked, stopping just short of her. Clara's lips parted, then closed again. She glanced down the street, where the two men from the night before lingered near the general store, watching her too intently. Her stomach knotted. "I don't trust Easy," she said, her voice low. "Good," Ethan replied. He swung a leg over his saddle and held the other reins out to her. "Out here, trusting to get you killed. But you got two choices. Keep dodging shadows or ride with me a while. My ranch is a day's ride. You'll be safer there than here." Clara hesitated. The gelding beside him tossed its head, hooves scuffing against the dirt. She wanted to refuse, to cling to the little pride she had left, but the weight of those men's stares pressed on her like a noose tightening. She reached for the reins. Ethan's expression softened just a flicker, as though he understood the cost of that decision. With a sharp nudge of his heels, he set his horse in motion, and Clara followed, the town shrinking behind them. The prairie stretched wide and endless, painted gold by the morning sun. Dust rose in little clouds beneath their horses' hooves. After a long silence broken only by the creak of saddles and a far-off cry of coyotes, Ethan spoke. "You don't have to tell me your troubles." "Not yet, but secrets fester. When you're ready, I'll listen." Clara kept her gaze on the horizon. The wind tugged strands of hair loose from her braid, stinging her eyes. "Maybe one day," she whispered. For the first time, she caught the edge of his smile. Not mocking, not prying, just steady, like the land itself. As the sun climbed higher, the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the dust. Clara's heart still beat fast with fear, but for the first time in months, it wasn't the only thing she felt. There was something else now, something fragile, like the promise of rain in a parched sky. Chapter 4. Gunfire at the Ranch. The ranch lay quiet beneath the wide evening sky, the horizon burning red where the sun dipped behind distant mesas. Clara stood on the porch with a rag in her hands, watching the last light wash over the corrals. For 2 days she had known a strange, fragile peace, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses, sharing suppers at Ethan's rough-hewn table. For a woman who had eaten scraps and slept in ditches, the simple rhythm felt like heaven. But heaven never lasts long in the West. The faint thunder of hooves broke the stillness. Clara's breath caught. Her fingers crushed the rag until her knuckles whitened. She knew that sound. It had haunted her across counties, across endless trails. Ethan stepped out, a rifle already in his hand, his jaw set like stone. "How many?" he asked, calm as ever. Clara strained her ears. 3, maybe 4. Her voice cracked. "They've found me." The riders came fast, silhouettes cutting against a fire-streaked sky. Dust rolled up around them as they drew near the fence line. One of the men reined in, shouting, "Hand her over, cowboy. She stole from the wrong men. You don't want her kind." Ethan's stance didn't shift. His voice carried, low but certain. "No one's taking her." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped closer, clutching his sleeve. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're outlaws. I ran from them. Her throat tightened. "I took gold they robbed from a stage. Not for me, for food, for escape. But they'll kill anyone who harbors me." Ethan looked at her then, steady as ever, his eyes holding not judgment but a deep, quiet resolve. "You should have told me sooner. Doesn't change a thing." The first gunshot cracked the silence. A bullet slammed into the porch beam, splinters flying. Clara shrieked, ducking, but Ethan pushed her behind him, raising his rifle. He fired once, clean, precise. One of the riders toppled from his saddle. Chaos erupted. The outlaws' shots tore across the yard, ricocheting off the water trough, the barn wall. Clara, trembling, grabbed a spare rifle prop by the door. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it, but Ethan barked, "Steady, Clara. Keep your eyes open." For the first time in her life, she did. She pulled the trigger, the kick slamming into her shoulder. A rider veered off with a curse, his hat flying into the dust. The fight lasted minutes, though it felt like a lifetime. At last, the outlaws wheeled their horses and retreated, leaving 2 sprawled in the dirt. The ranch felt eerily quiet again, save for the ragged sound of Clara's breathing. Ethan lowered his rifle. His shirt was torn, a graze of blood on his arm, but his eyes burned steady. He looked at her, a faint smile tugging his lips. "You did fine." Clara's knees buckled, and she leaned against him, tears stinging her dusty cheeks. For the first time, she wasn't running. Chapter 5. Hearts on the Line. The prairie night was thick with silence after the gunfight, broken only by the faint rustle of wind through the sagebrush. Clara stood in the barn doorway, the lantern in her hand, trembling as she watched Ethan wrap a strip of cloth around his wounded arm. His face was calm, as though pain were a thing he'd long since made peace with. "You should have let me go," she whispered. "They won't stop until I'm dead. Now you painted a target on yourself." Ethan glanced up, the shadow of his hat brim leaving his eyes half-hidden. "I've lived with a target on my back since the day I strapped on spurs. Difference is, this time it's worth it." The word struck her harder than any bullet. Clara lowered the lantern, her throat aching. "Why? You don't know me. I've lied to you, dragged trouble to your door." "You're alive," he cut in, his tone quiet but firm. "And you deserve to stay that way. I ain't about to watch a woman like you get swallowed up by wolves." Her breath shuddered out. She had never been anyone's cause worth fighting for. The realization left her both shaken and lit with something dangerously close to hope. They didn't have long to dwell. At dawn, the sound of more hooves carried across the open plain. Dust plumes rose, 6 riders this time, armed and angry. Clara's stomach turned to ice. She clutched Ethan's sleeve. "It's the rest of them. They'll burn this place to the ground." Ethan reached for his rifle, pressing it into her hands. "Then we stand together." She stared at the weapon, her palms sweating. "I can't." "You already did." His eyes held hers, steady, unflinching. "Don't forget it." Something in his voice broke through the fear. Clara nodded, jaw set. They took their places on the porch as the riders thundered closer, shouting threats. "You've got no chance, cowboy," the leader bellowed, a scar cutting across his jaw. "Hand her over, and we'll let you live." Ethan stepped forward, his voice carrying over the land like a church bell. "You'll have to ride through me first." Gunfire split the morning air. Clara flinched, but forced her fingers steady on the trigger, sending a shot that struck one outlaw's hat clean off. Another bullet tore through the water trough, spraying them with cold. Ethan's rifle roared beside her, each shot measured, each one a vow. Minutes stretched into eternity, but finally the outlaws broke. The survivors fled into the horizon, their curses fading with the thunder of retreating hooves. Clara sagged against the porch rail, smoke stinging her eyes, her whole body trembling. Ethan touched her shoulder gently, his voice rough with pride. "You were brave," he said, "braver than most men I've ridden with." Clara turned to him, tears shining in the rising sun. "No one's ever said that to me before." For the first time, she let herself believe she was worth fighting for. Chapter 6. The Necklace's Promise. By the time the last outlaw dust cloud vanished into the horizon, the ranch had fallen into a hushed stillness. Smoke still curled from a splintered porch post. The water trough lay cracked and leaking into the dirt, and one of the barn doors sagged from its hinges. Yet for all the scars, the land still stood, quiet, resolute, like the man who called it home. Clara sat on the porch steps, her knees drawn to her chest, the silver locket heavy in her palm. She turned it over again and again, watching the way the dawn light glinted off its worn surface. It had once been nothing more than a desperate bargaining chip. Now it carried weight she could hardly bear. Ethan emerged from the barn, his arm bound with a cleaner bandage. Dust streaked his shirt, and his eyes held the lines of a man who had spent too many nights staring down trouble. Yet when he looked at her, the hardness softened. "You're still here," he said simply, easing down beside her. Clara let out a shaky laugh. "For once, I don't want to run." She opened her hand, revealing the locket. "I meant to trade this for food, for survival, but I want you to take it now, as a promise. I don't have much else to give." Ethan studied her hand, then shook his head slowly. "I don't want your necklace, Clara." Her heart sank, though she tried to hide it. She began to pull it back, but his fingers closed gently around hers, warm and steady. "I want you," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, but steady as bedrock. "Stay here. Stay with me. That'll be worth more than all the silver in the world." The breath caught in her throat. She had expected pity, maybe kindness, but not this, never this. Her eyes burned as tears slipped down her cheeks, tracing paths through the dust. "I don't know how to be anything but broken," she whispered. Ethan reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face with surprising gentleness. "Then we'll mend together." The prairie wind stirred, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant call of coyotes. Horses grazed in the corral, their shadows long against the rising sun. For the first time, Clara felt as though the land itself was listening, holding its breath for her answer. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her. "Then I'll stay," she murmured. Ethan's arms wrapped around her, strong and sure. Above them, the sky blazed with color, amber, gold, and rose, like a new promise painted across the world. And in that moment, the hunted woman and the lonely cowboy ceased to be two lost souls. They were something more, a home hard-earned and fiercely kept, in each other's arms beneath the endless wild west sky. The sun bled low over the horizon, painting the plains in fire and gold. The air carried the scent of sagebrush, sharp and sweet, while coyotes called faintly in the distance. Ethan stood by the corral, tightening the gate he'd patched after the gunfight, his silhouette etched against the endless sky. Clara stepped from the porch, her silver locket glinting at her throat, the same one she had once tried to trade for bread. She crossed the yard slowly, skirts brushing the dust, and placed her hand over his. For a moment neither spoke, listening instead to the rhythm of the horses and the fading strains of saloon music drifting from town. The world felt at once vast and intimate, as though only they existed in it. "I never thought I'd find a place worth staying," Clara said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of truth. "And I never thought someone would stay for me." Ethan turned, his hand cupping her cheek, thumb brushing away a trace of dust and tears. "You don't have to run any more," he murmured, "because wherever you go, Clara, I'll be there." The locket slipped from her fingers into his palm, not as payment, but as a vow. He closed his fist around it, then bent to kiss her beneath the burning sunset. Behind them, the land stretched endless and untamed, but for the first time it felt like home.